of Nancy Guthrie. Authorities are now focusing tonight on two central pieces of evidence, including what could be that crucial DNA found in Nancy Guthrie's home. Here's our chief investigative correspondent, Aaron Kotursky, from Tucson again tonight.
Tonight, 19 days into the search for Nancy Guthrie, investigators are squarely focused on the two key clues they have, including DNA found inside her home. Sources telling ABC News it's a mixture of DNA from a male and a female. They need to separate it, and they're hoping the male DNA could help lead to a potential suspect. They have said the DNA is not from a member of Guthrie's family.
Search for Nancy Guthrie, and with no suspect on law enforcement's radar, there are fears this case has gone cold. DNA samples could still hold the key, but no second crime scene has been identified yet. And the sample investigators do have is mixed, meaning it contains the DNA of more than one person. This would have to be deconvoluted, as they say, and separated before a real analysis can even begin. Renowned DNA expert and genetic genealogist CeCe Moore told News Nation earlier this week that investigators should return to Nancy Guthrie's home in search of more samples. And CeCe joins us live tonight. CeCe, I always get so much out of our talks. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me again.
And you joined me for an episode of my Truth of the Matter podcast, almost 500,000 people watching that on YouTube. So many of them commenting, wanting to learn more from you regarding what you said about the likelihood of saliva DNA in that house from this perpetrator. You say that detail of him holding the flashlight in his mouth can't be ignored. What evidence do you think is still left in that house?
Well, it's hard to know what they have already collected. It's possible they collected dozens or hundreds of swabs, and they're still going through testing those. It's so hard for a crime scene investigator to know exactly what to swab, since most of DNA is invisible to the eye, right? So sometimes it just is a trained intuition that causes them to just swab the correct thing. Now, if they have tested everything and haven't found a good sample of the perpetrator's DNA, I do think that it is possible to go back to her home and do some more swabbing. But as I said, I wasn't there. I don't know how many they gathered, but DNA is hardy. So it's certainly possible. There is still some DNA there. And in particular, I really do think that saliva is the most likely. And that is because of what appeared to be that bite flashlight in his mouth.
Yeah.
Somebody wrote to me that has used one of those and agreed with me that it would produce a lot of saliva and it would be very difficult not to leave some of that behind.
And I know
the masked man puts a flashlight in his mouth. Not because he has no other option. He has two free hands. He has a backpack, a black Ozark Trail hiker pack specifically, according to the FBI. He has the capacity to hold that flashlight in any number of ways. He could clip it to his jacket. He could tuck it under his arm. He could set it down on the step. He puts it in his mouth. And for 75 days, as of this recording, that single behavioral choice may represent the most consequential forensic error the perpetrator made in this entire case. Because in placing that flashlight between his teeth, he may have deposited the one thing that can identify him: biological material. Specifically, saliva. Specifically, DNA. The question investigators have been working to answer since February 1st, 2026, the night Nancy Guthrie disappeared from her home in Tucson, Arizona, is whether that sample survived.
Whether it's clean enough, complete enough, and sufficient enough to run through the systems that could end this case. That is not a dramatic question. That is a forensic question, and the answer to it will determine whether the person who walked into an 84-year-old woman's home in the middle of the night is ever identified. This video is not about the family. It is not about the reward money. It is not about the ransom note or the Bitcoin demand. This video is about the DNA, where it is, what it can prove, and why, twice, this investigation came within one laboratory result of losing the only physical evidence that may ever tie a suspect to this crime. Let's go through the record. Before we dive deeper into this case, if you're new to Crime Case Studio, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our forensic breakdowns. And if you're already part of our community, drop a like on this video. It helps us bring you more detailed crime analysis. Now, stick with me until the very end of this investigation, because the DNA evidence we're about to discuss could be the key to solving this entire case. Before we examine the evidentiary record, we need to establish the factual baseline. This is the foundation every analytical conclusion in this video rests on. If the foundation isn't solid, nothing built on top of it holds. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She is a resident of Tucson, Arizona. She is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, co-host of NBC's Today Show. That biographical connection is relevant to exactly one forensic dimension of this case. It explains the scale and speed of the institutional response, the FBI involvement, the national coverage, the $100,000 federal reward, and the family's subsequent $1 million offering. Beyond that, the public profile of her daughter is irrelevant to the evidentiary record we're examining today. We are not here to discuss the media. We are here to discuss the science. What is forensically relevant about Nancy Guthrie specifically is this. She has limited mobility. She relies on daily medication for an active cardiac condition. She wears a pacemaker. That pacemaker is paired wirelessly to an app on her mobile phone. The app records in real time the device's operational status and, critically, its disconnection from the paired phone. That detail will become significant in approximately 6 minutes of this analysis. She also has a Nest Doorbell camera installed at the entrance to her home. The camera logs its own connectivity status, including network disconnections, independently of its video feed. These two systems, the pacemaker app and the doorbell camera, are, outside of the biological evidence, the most forensically significant artifacts in this case, because they created a time-stamped record of the night of January 31st to February 1st, 2026. A record that no perpetrator thought to eliminate. Everything that follows is grounded in publicly available law enforcement statements, confirmed reporting from the Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI, and verified forensic expert commentary. Where information is unconfirmed, contested, or inferential, I will say so explicitly. That is the methodology of this channel. The forensic examination of this case requires understanding not just what evidence was collected, but what systems were in place that made evidence collection possible. Nancy Guthrie's home was not heavily fortified with security systems, but the two digital monitoring systems she did have, the pacemaker monitoring app and the Nest doorbell camera, created what forensic investigators call a passive documentation system. These are systems that record data continuously in the background, without requiring active user engagement. The pacemaker app is particularly significant from an investigative standpoint. Modern cardiac pacemakers are sophisticated medical devices that communicate wirelessly with monitoring applications installed on a patient's smartphone. This communication occurs via Bluetooth low-energy protocols, typically maintaining a connection within a range of approximately 30 feet, though this can vary based on environmental factors, building materials, and interference from other electronic devices. The app logs multiple data points: heart rate, pacing activity, battery status, and, crucially for our purposes, connection status. When the pacemaker moves beyond the effective range of the paired device, or when the paired device is powered down or removed from proximity, the app registers a disconnection event. This event is time-stamped with precision down to the minute. This is not speculative technology. This is standard medical telemetry used in cardiac care management across the United States. The FDA regulates these devices. Their data logs are admissible in court proceedings, and in cases where a patient's location and movement become subjects of criminal investigation, these logs can provide investigators with a biological breadcrumb trail that cannot be easily falsified or erased. Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker was transmitting data to her phone throughout the evening of January 31st, 2026. That transmission continued uninterrupted until 2:28 a.m. on February 1st. At that moment, the connection was severed. The app recorded the disconnection, and from that moment forward, Nancy Guthrie's biological monitoring signal went silent. The Nest doorbell camera operates on different principles, but provides complementary documentation. Unlike the pacemaker, which monitors an internal biological system, the Nest camera monitors external environmental activity. It connects to the home's Wi-Fi network and streams video footage to cloud servers operated by Google, Nest's parent company. The camera has motion detection capabilities, night vision, and local processing that allows it to distinguish between different types of movement: human figures, vehicles, animals. But for our purposes, the most important feature of the NEST system is not what it records, but what it logs. Every connectivity event, every connection, disconnection, motion detection trigger, and network handshake is logged with a timestamp. These logs are stored both locally on the device and remotely on NEST's cloud infrastructure. This redundancy is forensically significant. Even if the physical camera is damaged, removed, or destroyed, the cloud logs persist. An attacker can disable the camera. An attacker can prevent it from recording new footage, but an attacker cannot retroactively erase the metadata logs already transmitted to the cloud without gaining unauthorized access to Google's secure server infrastructure, a substantially more difficult task than simply yanking a camera off a doorframe. This is the forensic baseline. An 84-year-old woman with limited mobility, a monitored cardiac condition, and 2 passive digital monitoring systems that created a time-stamped record of the night she disappeared. No single piece of this baseline is extraordinary. Millions of Americans wear pacemakers. Millions have doorbell cameras. But the intersection of these systems, in this case, at this moment, created a documentary record that would prove essential to reconstructing what happened. Now we turn to that record. January 31st, 2026. 5:32 p.m. Nancy Guthrie arrives at the home of her daughter, Annie. This is a routine visit, dinner with family. She is seen, documented, present, and accounted for. There is nothing anomalous about this event. Multiple family members were present. Conversation was normal. Nancy Guthrie ate dinner, participated in family discussion, and showed no signs of distress, illness, or unusual behavior. This is relevant because it establishes her baseline mental and physical state in the hours immediately preceding her disappearance. She was lucid, mobile within her physical limitations, and operating within her normal behavioral patterns. From a forensic timeline perspective, this dinner serves as the last confirmed multi-witness observation of Nancy Guthrie in a safe and controlled environment. Everything that follows will be reconstructed from physical evidence, digital logs, and witness statements from individuals who were not present at the scene. January 31st, 2026, 9:48 p.m. Nancy Guthrie is dropped off at her residence by her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni. Per the sheriff's confirmed statement, Cioni waited in his vehicle outside until Nancy Guthrie had entered the home before he drove away. This is significant for 2 reasons. First, it establishes that Nancy Guthrie successfully entered her home under her own power and secured the entrance behind her. There was no forced entry at this time, no sign of distress, no indication that anything was amiss. Second, it establishes the last moment a witness can confirm her safe presence inside the residence. Cioni's statement has been corroborated by the garage door system log, which I will address momentarily. He is not a suspect. He has been formally cleared, but his testimony provides a verified endpoint to the known safe timeline. All 3 adult children, Annie, Savannah, and Cameron Guthrie, and their spouses have been formally cleared by the Pima County Sheriff's Department as suspects. This is confirmed and documented. It is not revisited in this analysis. When law enforcement publicly clears immediate family members in a case of this nature, that clearance is typically based on verified alibis, digital footprint analysis, financial record examination, and often polygraph examinations. The clearance is not casual. It is the result of investigative scrutiny. January 31st, 2026, 9:50 p.m. The garage door at the Guthrie residence closes. This is logged by the automated system. Per the sheriff's confirmed statement, this represents the last moment investigators can place Nancy Guthrie safely inside her home with certainty. Garage door systems with automated monitoring capabilities log each opening and closing event. These logs include timestamps and, in some systems, the method of activation: remote control, wall switch, smartphone app, or manual release. The log from the Guthrie residence confirms that the garage door closed at 9:50 p.m. It does not record another opening until after Nancy Guthrie was reported missing. This tells us 2 things. First, if an intruder entered the property after 9:50 p.m., they did not use the garage entrance. Second, Nancy Guthrie did not leave the property via the garage at any point between 9:50 p.m. and the moment her family discovered her missing. From 9:50 p.m. on January 31st to 1:47 a.m. on February 1st, a window of nearly 4 hours, there is no verified forensic event recorded at the property. The evidentiary record is silent. She is, as best the record shows, asleep. But that silence is about to break. February 1st, 2026, 1:47 a.m. The Nest doorbell camera at the front entrance disconnects from the home's Wi-Fi network. This is not a power outage. It is not a router reset. It is not a network anomaly from a storm event. The camera, specifically the camera, disconnects at 1:47 a.m. For those unfamiliar with doorbell camera infrastructure, a deliberate network disconnection requires physical intervention with the device, a targeted signal disruption, or a manual override of the network it's connected to. Power interruptions would affect other devices on the same circuit. A targeted camera disconnection at a specific time suggests intentionality. Let's examine what this means technically. The Nest doorbell camera connects to the home Wi-Fi network and maintains that connection continuously while powered. If the home loses internet connectivity, if the router goes offline, if the ISP experiences an outage, the camera would lose its ability to transmit footage to the cloud, but it would still attempt to maintain its local network connection. The camera's status log would reflect an internet outage, not a network disconnection. If the home loses electrical power entirely, a circuit breaker trip, a power outage affecting the neighborhood, all devices on that circuit would go offline simultaneously. Investigators confirmed that other devices in the Guthrie home remained online and operational during this window. The refrigerator continued running. The HVAC system continued cycling. Digital clocks did not reset. Only the doorbell camera lost connectivity. This suggests one of 3 scenarios. First, someone physically disconnected the camera from its power source or removed it from its mounting bracket, severing the connection. Second, someone deployed a targeted wireless jamming device to disrupt the camera's network communications specifically. Third, someone accessed the home's router settings and manually disconnected the camera through administrative controls. Each scenario requires a degree of premeditation and technical knowledge. Each scenario indicates that the perpetrator knew the camera was there and took deliberate action to neutralize it. The Pima County Sheriff Department has confirmed the timestamp. What they have not publicly confirmed is the mechanism. What they have confirmed is the consequence. From 1:47 a.m. forward, no video record of the front of that property is available. The camera goes dark, and someone is at the door. February 1st, 2026, approximately 2:12 a.m. Nest's motion detection software, not the camera feed but the automated back-end algorithms, logs a detection event at the property. This occurs approximately 25 minutes after the camera itself goes offline. The sheriff described this as detecting someone or possibly an animal. No visual imagery was recovered. This is motion-based detection only. This requires explanation. Even when a Nest camera is disconnected from the network and unable to transmit live footage, its passive infrared motion sensor can still detect movement within its field of view. Some camera models store a brief buffer of motion event metadata locally before the device fully powers down. That metadata can include the timestamp of the motion event and a rudimentary classification, human, vehicle, animal, based on the size and heat signature of the movement. That metadata was recovered from the Guthrie residence camera. It indicates that at approximately 2:12 a.m., 25 minutes after the camera lost network connectivity, there was detectable motion at the front entrance to the home. But the timing establishes something forensically important. There is continued activity at the property 25 minutes after the camera disconnects. Whatever was happening at that front entrance, it was not a brief event. This is significant because it suggests the perpetrator did not disconnect the camera and immediately enter the home.
There was a delay. 25 minutes is a substantial operational window in the context of a residential intrusion. It suggests either hesitation, preparation, or additional activity occurring outside the immediate entry point. One possibility: the perpetrator disconnected the camera, moved away from the immediate vicinity to avoid detection by other means, then returned to execute the entry. Another possibility: the perpetrator spent those 25 minutes conducting counter-surveillance, checking for additional cameras, verifying that no neighbors were awake, ensuring that no patrol vehicles were in the area. A third possibility, less commonly discussed but forensically relevant: the perpetrator may have spent that time preparing Nancy Guthrie for removal from the home. If she was awake and resistant, if she required physical restraint or coercion, that process takes time. The blood evidence found at the scene, which we will address shortly, supports the conclusion that there was a physical struggle. 25 minutes is a long time to be at a crime scene. Long enough to make mistakes. Long enough to leave evidence behind. February 1st, 2026, 2:28 a.m. Nancy Guthrie's Pacemaker app logs a disconnection event. The pacemaker, wirelessly paired to her mobile phone, disconnects from the app. Per the confirmed technical specifications of cardiac pairing systems, this disconnection occurs when the paired device loses proximity to the implanted unit, typically beyond 6 to 10 meters, depending on the Bluetooth protocol, or when the mobile device is powered off. In forensic terms, at 2:28 a.m., Nancy Guthrie was moved beyond the range of her phone. Or her phone was removed from the home. Or both. This is the last known biological signal from Nancy Guthrie on record. Let's parse what this disconnection means. If Nancy Guthrie's phone was still in the home, on a nightstand, in a living room, on a kitchen counter, and she was moved out of the home, the pacemaker would lose its connection to the app once she passed beyond Bluetooth range. That range, under optimal conditions, is approximately 30 feet. In a residential structure with walls, doors, and interference from other electronics, effective range can drop to 20 feet or less. If Nancy Guthrie was taken from her bedroom to a vehicle parked in the driveway or on the street, the disconnection at 2:28 a.m. would be consistent with her being moved outside the effective range of her phone, which remained inside. Alternatively, if the perpetrator took her phone, either to prevent her from calling for help or to eliminate a potential tracking device, and powered it down or destroyed it, the pacemaker would similarly log a disconnection. What investigators have not publicly confirmed is whether Nancy Guthrie's phone was recovered at the scene. If it was, and if it was still powered on, that tells us she was removed from the home. If it was not recovered, or if it was found damaged or powered off, that tells us the perpetrator recognized it as a potential liability. Either way, at 2:28 a.m., the biological telemetry link to Nancy Guthrie was severed. From that moment forward, her pacemaker has been broadcasting into the void, with no paired device to receive its signal. If Nancy Guthrie is alive, her pacemaker is still functioning. It is still attempting to connect. And if she is brought within range of a device configured to receive that signal, a medical facility, an ambulance, a hospital emergency room, that connection will reestablish, and the app will log the reconnection event. No such reconnection has been reported. February 1st, 2026, approximately 12 p.m. A friend calls Nancy Guthrie's family. She has not arrived at church. This is not a minor deviation from routine. It is a definitive breach of an established pattern. Her family goes to the home. They arrive around noon. They contact the sheriff's department minutes later. Nancy Guthrie attended church regularly. Her absence was immediately noticed. The friend who called her family knew her routine well enough to recognize that her non-appearance was anomalous. This speaks to the consistency of her schedule and the attentiveness of her social network. When family members arrived at the home, they found signs that something was wrong. The exact nature of those signs has not been fully detailed in public reporting, but the Pima County Sheriff's Department was contacted within minutes. That response time suggests the family encountered evidence of forced entry, signs of a struggle, or other indicators that Nancy Guthrie had not simply left the home of her own accord. February 1st, 2026, 12:15 p.m. Pima County Sheriff's deputies arrive at the residence. The property shows indicators consistent with forced or coerced entry. By February 2nd, Sheriff Chris Nanos uses the word he had initially avoided. She didn't walk from there. She didn't go willingly. That is the established timeline. Those are the verified facts. Everything from this point forward is a forensic examination of what investigators found inside that house, and what they almost lost. When investigators process a scene of this type, an apparent forced abduction from a private residence, the forensic priorities follow a documented hierarchy. First, biological evidence: blood, saliva, skin cells, hair follicles, anything that can yield a DNA profile. Second, digital evidence: surveillance footage, device logs, cloud data, cellular tower records. Third, physical trace evidence: fibers, footwear impressions, latent fingerprints, tool marks. The Nancy Guthrie crime scene produced findings in all three categories. But it is the biological evidence, specifically the DNA, that has defined, complicated, and very nearly destroyed this investigation. Here is what the record shows. Outside the front door of the Guthrie residence, investigators found what appeared to be drops of blood. Additional blood evidence was reported inside the home by a law enforcement source speaking to CBS News. The exterior blood was subsequently confirmed by Sheriff Nanos as belonging to Nancy Guthrie. Blood confirmation serves two forensic functions here. First, it confirms a violent event. Physical contact between the victim and the suspect occurred at or near the entry point of the home. Second, and more critically, it establishes a DNA transfer opportunity. Where there is physical contact sufficient to produce blood evidence, there is potential for bidirectional biological material transfer. Perpetrator DNA onto her skin or clothing, her DNA onto his. The blood tells us contact happened. Contact is a deposition event. The presence of blood outside the front door is particularly significant. It suggests that Nancy Guthrie was either injured during the initial entry phase of the crime, or that she was injured inside the home and subsequently moved to the exterior, where additional blood was deposited. Either scenario indicates a struggle. Either scenario indicates force. Blood pattern analysis, a forensic discipline that examines the size, shape, distribution, and location of bloodstains to reconstruct the events that created them, can provide additional insights. Small, round drops suggest blood dripping from a stationary source or a source moving slowly. Elongated or elliptical drops suggest movement or directionality. Spatter patterns suggest impact or force. The specific characteristics of the blood found at the Guthrie residence have not been publicly detailed, but the fact that investigators identified the blood as Nancy Guthrie's tells us that sufficient quantity and quality were present to extract a DNA profile and compare it to her known genetic reference. That comparison was conclusive. If blood from an unknown contributor was also present at the scene, blood from the perpetrator, that would represent direct biological evidence linking him to the crime. Investigators have not confirmed the presence of suspect blood at the scene, but they have also not ruled it out. The absence of public confirmation is not the same as the absence of evidence. Laboratory analysis of blood evidence is a lengthy process, particularly when samples are small, degraded, or mixed with other biological material. What we know is this: Nancy Guthrie's blood was found outside her front door. That blood was deposited during the event that led to her disappearance. And where there is blood, there is DNA. Despite the disconnection at 1:47 a.m., investigators recovered footage from an earlier window. The Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI released a portion of this footage on February 10th. In the footage, a masked man, described by the FBI as approximately 5 feet 9 inches to 5 feet 10 inches tall, average build, wearing a face mask, black gloves, and a black Ozark Trail hiker pack backpack, and he has a flashlight in his mouth. Forensic note: this behavioral choice is not incidental. The act of placing a flashlight between the teeth, rather than holding it in a free hand, clipping it to a jacket, or placing it in the backpack, is an atypical operational decision. It may reflect urgency. It may reflect a specific training background or occupational habit. Let's examine this more closely. The decision to hold a flashlight in one's mouth, rather than in one's hands, suggests that both hands are occupied with tasks that require manual dexterity and cannot be interrupted. Common scenarios where this behavior occurs: mechanics working in confined spaces, electricians working on overhead fixtures, soldiers or law enforcement conducting tactical operations where both hands must remain on a weapon. This behavior can also indicate familiarity with environments where handheld lighting is insufficient or impractical. Someone who has worked extensively in confined or low-light environments, HVAC systems, crawl spaces, attics, underground utilities, may default to mouth-held lighting as a learned operational habit. But from a pure biological evidence standpoint, it has one very specific meaning. The interior mouthpiece of that flashlight was in sustained oral contact with the perpetrator. His buccal cells, epithelial cells from the inner surface of his cheeks, his tongue, his gum line, were being shed onto that surface. His saliva was coating the point of contact, carrying nuclear DNA. If that flashlight exists, if it was recovered, it is potentially the single most significant forensic artifact in this case. The footage also provides investigative leads beyond the biological evidence. The Ozark Trail Hiker Pack is a specific product sold primarily through Walmart. It is a budget-tier outdoor backpack, widely available and commonly purchased. That ubiquity makes it difficult to trace through retail records, but it also suggests something about the perpetrator's economic profile or purchasing habits. High-end tactical gear is expensive and often purchased by individuals with specific professional or recreational backgrounds. Budget outdoor gear is purchased by individuals prioritizing cost over performance. The mask obscures facial features entirely, which indicates premeditation and an awareness of surveillance systems. The gloves eliminate fingerprint evidence, which again indicates planning. But the flashlight, placed in the mouth in sustained contact with mucosal membranes, represents a gap in that operational security. This is the contradiction at the heart of this case. The perpetrator took steps to avoid identification. He masked his face. He gloved his hands. He disabled the camera, but he placed a biological evidence collection device directly into his mouth and held it there while conducting a crime. That contradiction may be what solves this case. Investigators did not find the suspect's gloves at the scene. They found them, or what they initially believed to be his gloves, approximately 2 miles from the Guthrie residence. A set of black gloves, visually matching those worn by the masked man in the doorbell footage, was recovered during a roadside search of the surrounding area. They were submitted to a contracted forensic laboratory in Florida. A DNA profile was extracted and uploaded to CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, the FBI's Federal Genetic Records database. The result? No match. CODIS contains nearly 27 million DNA profiles. More than 19 million of those come from individuals convicted of crimes. It has aided more than 750,000 criminal investigations since its operational launch in the 1990s. And it returned nothing. No match. No prior criminal record. No existing DNA entry in the federal system for the profile obtained from those gloves. But here's the second problem, one that received less public attention than the CODIS dead end. Those gloves may not be connected to the case at all. During the area searches surrounding the Guthrie residence, investigators collected approximately 16 gloves. Not one pair, 16 individual gloves from various locations in the search perimeter. Each was evaluated. Each was treated as potential evidence. The pair that most closely matched the visual description from the footage, black gloves consistent with those worn by the suspect, was prioritized and submitted to the Florida lab. A DNA profile was obtained. CODIS was run. No hit. Investigators worked on the working assumption that those gloves were connected to the suspect. It was a reasonable inference. Matching appearance, found in the general egress direction from the scene, recovered during a targeted search. On March 4, 2026, the Pima County Sheriff's Department confirmed the conclusion of that analysis. The DNA from those specific gloves had been traced to a person who works at a restaurant in the area. Not a suspect, not a person of interest. A local food service employee whose discarded work gloves happened to match the visual description of those worn by the masked man in the footage. Forensic note: this outcome is not investigative failure. This is the correct protocol. The collection radius in an abduction case is necessarily broad. You collect everything within the search perimeter and process elimination through the laboratory, not in the field. The gloves were collected, submitted, analyzed, and eliminated. That sequence is procedurally sound.
But here is what this means for the investigation's timeline. The gloves consumed laboratory capacity, forensic analyst hours, and investigative attention for weeks, and produced nothing actionable. In a case where an 84-year-old woman with a cardiac condition has been missing since February 1st, processing time is the one resource that cannot be recovered once spent. The gloves were the first near miss, a weeks-long forensic detour that ended at a restaurant kitchen, not a suspect. They were not the last near miss. If you're still watching, I need you to stay with me because what comes next is critical to understanding why this case may come down to a single piece of DNA evidence. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed to Crime Case Studio and hit that like button. We're about to get into the laboratory work that could make or break this entire investigation. While the gloves were consuming lab time and returning nothing, the more significant evidentiary challenge was developing inside the Guthrie residence itself. Biological samples were collected from the interior of the home during the crime scene processing. These samples represent a direct connection to the abduction event, not perimeter evidence, not incidental discovery, but biological material from the actual scene of the crime. And those samples had a problem. On February 24, 2026, CBS News reported, citing multiple law enforcement sources with direct knowledge of the investigation, that the DNA recovered from inside the house was characterized as low-level. In forensic biology, low-level has a specific and precise technical meaning. It refers to a DNA sample where the quantity of biological material present is insufficient to generate a complete and reliable genetic profile under standard analysis protocols. A standard profile, the type submitted to CODIS, requires a measurable quantity of high molecular weight DNA at each of the genetic loci being tested. When the source material is degraded, contaminated, or simply too sparse at the collection site, the resulting profile can be incomplete, unreliable, or entirely unworkable. One law enforcement source told CBS News that a low-level sample would likely mean there was not enough DNA material present to get a clean and reliable result. Parse that phrase carefully. Not enough to get a clean and reliable result. That is not, the DNA doesn't exist. That is, the DNA may exist, but not in sufficient quantity or quality to process through standard forensic pathways. That distinction matters enormously for what comes next. There was, however, a counterpoint embedded in that same report. A second source confirms that even a low-level sample can be enhanced, but that it would take longer to achieve. The technique being referenced is probabilistic genotyping. Probabilistic genotyping is an advanced computational method that uses statistical modeling to reconstruct possible DNA profiles from degraded or mixed samples. Rather than requiring complete genetic data at every tested locus, probabilistic genotyping tools, STR-Mix, True Allele, and several others, build statistical models of what a complete profile most likely looks like, based on what partial data is available. It can, under certain conditions, extract meaningful and courtroom-viable data from samples that standard extraction methods cannot process. It is used routinely in forensic labs confronting exactly this type of evidentiary challenge. The Pima County Sheriff's contracted Florida laboratory was, as of the most recent confirmed reporting, applying these enhanced techniques to the interior samples. A conclusion had not been publicly confirmed at the time of that reporting. That is the second near miss. Not a confirmed failure, but a confirmed uncertainty. The DNA from inside the house may produce a workable profile. It may not, and the laboratory has not yet publicly confirmed which. There is a further analytical challenge that emerged in reporting from mid-March 2026. The samples recovered from the Guthrie residence appear to contain mixed DNA, genetic material from more than one individual contributing to the same sample. Mixed profiles are substantially more complex to analyze than single source samples. When two or more individuals' DNA are present in the same sample, their profiles overlap at each genetic locus. Separating those contributions, a process called deconvolution, requires statistical modeling tools like those mentioned above, and the reliability of that separation decreases as the ratio of contributors becomes harder to distinguish. Translation? If the perpetrator is a minor contributor in a mixed profile, a small amount of his biological material combined with a larger amount of Nancy Guthrie's, the laboratory work required to isolate and validate his profile is considerable. It is possible, but it is not fast. And in a case where an individual's life may depend on investigative speed, that matters. The lab is doing that work, but the clock is running, and this case has already spent weeks on a set of gloves that led to a restaurant. On February 19, 2026, the Pima County Sheriff's Department issued a statement confirming that investigators were currently looking into additional investigative genetic genealogy options for DNA evidence to check for matches. Parse that sentence carefully. Additional investigative genetic genealogy options means standard CODIS analysis had already been attempted and failed to produce a result. The investigation was moving to a different toolkit entirely, one that doesn't rely on criminal conviction records, but on publicly available consumer genetic databases and the ancestral relationships encoded in them. That toolkit is Forensic Investigative Genetic Genealogy, FIGG. First, a correction to a persistent public misconception. FIGG does not involve law enforcement searching ancestry. It does not involve a warrant served on 23andMe. Most consumer genetic testing companies, including Ancestry, prohibit law enforcement from accessing their proprietary databases without a valid court order. And in practice, Ancestry has confirmed it has not received valid law enforcement requests to access its database in recent years. What FIGG uses instead are two opt-in, publicly accessible databases, GEDmatch Pro and Family Tree DNA. Users of these platforms, many of whom initially tested their DNA with private consumer companies, can choose to upload their raw genetic data files to these public sites and actively opt in to allowing law enforcement to search their profiles. It is voluntary. It is consent-based. And it is the mechanism that made FIGG forensically viable. Here is how the process works operationally. A usable DNA profile extracted from crime scene evidence is uploaded to GEDmatch Pro, or Family Tree DNA. The platform searches for partial matches, not necessarily to the suspect himself, but to individuals who share genetic ancestry with the unknown contributor, a third cousin, a second cousin once removed, someone who shares enough of the same ancestral DNA to confirm a biological relationship. That partial match is then handed to a forensic genealogist. The genealogist's job is to work backward from the match, reconstructing a family tree from the partial genetic relationship outward, using public records, birth certificates, death records, marriage filings, census data, property records. Kathleen Corrado, executive director of the Forensic and National Security Sciences Institute at Syracuse University, has noted that when working at the third cousin level, the candidate pool can definitely be in the hundreds. Each potential relative must be cross-referenced against public records and then evaluated against known facts, geographic proximity to the crime, relevant time frame, physical description match. The process can take weeks. It can take months. It can, in some cases, take years. It is labor-intensive, not algorithmic. And there is no guarantee of a result. But it has worked before, and the proof of concept is directly relevant to this case. Because the same investigators, same technology, and same forensic pathway was cited by the Pima County Sheriff himself in discussing this investigation. In November 2022,
4 University of Idaho students were murdered at their off-campus home in Moscow, Idaho. Investigators had biological evidence from the crime scene. CODIS returned no match. FIGG was applied. Within weeks, investigators had identified a partial genetic match in the database. From that match, they reconstructed a family tree. Within that family tree, they identified a candidate, Bryan Kohberger, a criminal justice graduate student at Washington State University, approximately 8 miles from the crime scene. The next step was a surreptitious DNA collection. Investigators obtained discarded biological material from Kohberger, material he voluntarily discarded in a public context, requiring no warrant for collection. That sample was compared against the crime scene profile. The match confirmed. A warrant was issued. Bryan Kohberger was arrested in December 2022 and subsequently sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences. FIGG worked in that case because the DNA quality was sufficient, because the sample produced a workable profile, because the genealogy databases contained a partial match close enough to trace to a specific family. In the Nancy Guthrie case, every one of those conditions is contingent. The DNA quality from the interior samples, uncertain. The profile usability, uncertain. The database match, uncertain. FIGG is the fallback position. It is a powerful tool, but it requires the thing this investigation has been unable to confirm: viable biological material. The flashlight in the mouth is the detail that has haunted this investigation from the beginning. It is visible in the doorbell footage. It is unmistakable. It is the behavioral anomaly that every forensic analyst reviewing this case has focused on. Because that flashlight, if it was recovered, if it was processed correctly, if the biological material on it survives the collection and analysis process, represents a single-source DNA sample directly deposited by the perpetrator under controlled conditions. Let me explain what makes this different from the other biological evidence in the case. The DNA inside the Guthrie residence is mixed. It contains contributions from Nancy Guthrie and potentially from the perpetrator. But separating those contributions is analytically complex. The DNA from the gloves found near the scene was single source, but it belonged to someone unconnected to the crime. The blood evidence confirms Nancy Guthrie was injured, but unless the perpetrator was also bleeding, it does not provide suspect DNA. The flashlight is different. When a person places an object between their teeth and holds it there for an extended period, in the doorbell footage suggests the flashlight was in the suspect's mouth for at least several seconds. Saliva is transferred to the object. Saliva contains buccal epithelial cells, which contain nuclear DNA. Those cells adhere to the surface of the object. They can be collected, they can be extracted, and critically, they are single source. Unless the flashlight was previously handled by another individual whose DNA was deposited on the mouthpiece, a scenario that is possible but can be controlled for through elimination sampling, the DNA recovered from the oral contact area of that flashlight should belong exclusively to the person who placed it in their mouth. That is the forensic ideal: single source, high quality, directly deposited DNA from the perpetrator. But only if the flashlight was recovered. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has not confirmed whether the flashlight was found at the scene. They have not confirmed whether it was processed for DNA. They have not confirmed the results of any such processing. This silence is notable. The disconnection of Nancy Guthrie's Pacemaker app at 2:28 a.m. is one of the most forensically significant events in this case. It is also one of the most medically significant. Nancy Guthrie has an active cardiac condition. She wears a pacemaker to regulate her heart rhythm. That pacemaker requires ongoing monitoring to ensure it is functioning correctly. If the pacemaker malfunctions, if the battery depletes, if the device encounters an error condition, the consequences can be life-threatening. As of this recording, 75 days have passed since the pacemaker disconnection event. That is 75 days without confirmed cardiac monitoring. That is 75 days without verified medical intervention. The implications of this timeline are not speculative. They are medical. Individuals with pacemakers require regular monitoring to ensure device function. If Nancy Guthrie has been deprived of that monitoring, her health is at risk. If her pacemaker has malfunctioned during that period, her life is at risk. This is not a secondary concern in this investigation. This is a primary investigative urgency. The clock is not just running on the forensic evidence. The clock is running on Nancy Guthrie's life. As of this recording, 75 days have passed since Nancy Guthrie disappeared from her home in Tucson, Arizona. The DNA evidence from inside the residence is low-level and mixed. It is being analyzed using probabilistic genotyping methods. The results of that analysis have not been publicly confirmed. The gloves recovered near the scene were tested and traced to an individual unconnected to the crime. They consumed weeks of laboratory time and investigative resources.
The flashlight, the single most potentially significant forensic artifact in this case, has not been publicly confirmed as recovered or analyzed. The pacemaker monitoring app logged a disconnection event at 2:28 a.m. on February 1, 2026. That disconnection represents the last known biological signal from Nancy Guthrie. The Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI are applying forensic investigative genetic genealogy techniques to the available DNA evidence. Those techniques have been successful in prior cases, but they require viable DNA profiles to function. Whether the DNA from this case meets that threshold has not been publicly confirmed. The investigation is active. Resources are being applied. The case is not cold. But it is also not resolved. And Nancy Guthrie is still missing. This video is not about speculation. It is not about theories. It is about the evidence, what it shows, what it proves, and what it cannot yet confirm. The DNA is the key. It has always been the key. And the investigation's success or failure will be determined by whether that DNA survived the collection process, the laboratory process, and the analytical process in sufficient quality to produce a usable profile. That is the question investigators are working to answer. And when they have that answer, we will know whether the person who put a flashlight in his mouth made the mistake that will end this case. If you made it to the end of this investigation, thank you for watching. This is the kind of deep forensic analysis we do here at Crime Case Studio. If you want more cases broken down with this level of detail, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and drop a like on this video. Share it with anyone interested in true crime and forensic science, and let me know in the comments what case you want us to cover next. Until then, stay informed, stay critical, and keep questioning the evidence.